All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of Essential Essence 20. Join me as we explore the features, focuses, powers, and perks of the Essence 20 system to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today we are going to be exploring the leader of the Power Rangers, the Red Ranger. Quick reminder, if you do enjoy this content, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important. Now, let's talk about the Red Ranger. The Red Ranger is one of two colors that have appeared in every single Power Rangers team. That other one being blue. Every single Power Rangers team has had a Red Ranger, and every single Power Rangers team has had a Blue Ranger. And all but, I think, two Ranger teams, the Red Ranger has been the leader. The Alien Rangers, the White Ranger was actually the leader of the group. And then for Time Force, the Pink Ranger was the leader. Literally every other Ranger team had a Red Ranger, and the Red Ranger was the leader. The Red Ranger powers in general tend to go to a character whose kind of primary defining character trait is their leadership abilities. To the point where in Power Rangers Cosmic Fury, which was the third season of Power Rangers Dino Fury, when the Power Rangers effectively get upgrades to their power, where they go from being Dino Fury Rangers to Cosmic Fury Rangers, the Pink Ranger was upgraded to Red Ranger for two reasons. One, the previous Red Ranger, Zayato, was the Beige Ranger at that point. And there's a whole thing about that. I was really, really not particularly fond of that development for that character because it was a dumb character development. But the other reason was the Pink Ranger, which I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, but the Pink Ranger had effectively just jumped into the leadership position because at that point the Beige Ranger was off doing beige things and wasn't a part of the team. And when the team was looking to someone to provide some sort of leadership, they all just looked to her. And so she naturally just went into this role of, okay, if we need a leader, I'm going to be the leader. And didn't think anything of it until they got their new powers, and she looked down at her outfit and she said, wait a minute, my Pink Ranger suit is like dark. Am I a dark Pink Ranger? How does that work? No, you're the Red Ranger. You're the leader of this team. So, and I guess technically the White Ranger was the leader of the team from Season 2 and in Season 3 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Despite the fact that the White Ranger was using a suit from a completely different Power Ranger series and never really interacted with the Zhu Rangers. So, anyway, the idea of the Red Ranger being linked, like the primary thing that makes you a Red Ranger is your leadership skills, tracks out over and over and over and over and over again. Even when you have characters that really don't think that they have leadership skills, that's part of their growth. Like if you look at the Red SPD Ranger, he starts off as a criminal. He's given the red SPD Morpher, which pisses off the Blue Ranger, because the Blue Ranger's dad had been a Red Ranger, and so he thought he was going to be a Red Ranger. And now not only was he not the Red Ranger, but he was subordinate to a criminal. That was part of Sky's growth, was him learning what real leadership was. And when he finally learned what real leadership was near the end of the series, he was given the Red Ranger Morpher. And the same thing was true about, and I can never remember his name either. I don't know why I remember Sky's name, but I do. He kind of had to, because he was this kind of lone ranger style, like lone wolf style person, and now he's part of a team and has to be the leader, and that's part of his thing. You see that kind of over and over and over again with Red Rangers, is that their character journey is them kind of realizing what leadership is and what they need to do to be a good leader. And quite a few times you will have these little power struggles between the person that thinks they should be the leader and the real leader. So yeah, when we're talking about Red Rangers throughout Power Rangers, they're almost exclusively leaders. And the few, quote, non-leaders generally tend to be characters that think they should be leaders, but don't quite have the right leadership characteristics. Things like the Quantum Ranger in Time Force. He's like, I'm a military person and I'm better than these little vigilantes. And he realizes eventually that Wes is a better leader than him. And when Wes, if I remember correctly, when Wes joins the Silver Guardians, he kind of co-leads with whatever the Quantum Ranger's name is. I can't remember his name now. I'm really bad with names. And then with the Thunder Rangers in Ninja Storm, again, Blake and Blake's brother. I don't know why I have such a weird block on some of these names, but the Burgundy Ranger, or the Moon Ranger, or Maroon Ranger, I can't remember what he officially was. But again, he kind of shows those leadership, thinks that he has those leadership capabilities, and eventually really just doesn't. So in general, you would think that because of the huge emphasis on leadership that is built into the lore of the Red Ranger, that the mechanics would reflect that. And this is one of the reasons why I tend to prefer not linking the colors with the Rangers, because first of all, you can't have Rangers that kind of play against type, because mechanics kind of do that. But in addition to that, sometimes the mechanics are not perfect. For this one, the alternate name I have for the Red Ranger is the leader, because a couple of the features really do focus on that leadership aspect, and there really wasn't a better name that I could come up for it. But the Red Ranger in Essence20 leads, is a frontline general, for lack of a better term. He leads by wading into combat and doing a lot of things himself, which is not the greatest leadership quality. And maybe someday I might rename this character, just because they're not really a perfect leader. But there's enough here that feels leadership-esque, that the leader makes sense. So that being said, let's actually look at the features of the Red Ranger role. So moving on. I have my orange juice today. So, Spectrum role features. The Red Ranger role, we've talked before, in the Power Rangers RPG, every role has access to personal power, which is used to fuel grid power abilities, and sometimes is also used to fuel abilities that are built into the role. It's basically just a limited resource, and different roles have a different amount that they get and a different amount that they recharge every day. The Red Ranger role has what's referred to in the book as slow personal power gain. And what that basically means, they start at 2, but they only ever get to 10 at maximum level, and they only regenerate 2 personal power per day. So this particular character is not meant to rely a ton on personal power to be able to do cool things. And we'll find out later exactly why. This character is really built around, I'm going to attack, and I'm going to attack a lot. So the fact that they don't get the ability to use a ton of personal power every single day kind of makes sense, because especially once you start getting to higher levels, you start losing functionality by replacing 3 or sometimes 4 attacks with a single grid power ability. Yeah. After we get past the personal power for training, they're trained in light, medium, and now heavy armor. This is our first heavy armor ranger that we've found. And again, in other Essence20 RPGs, that will affect the kind of armors you can equip. In Essence20, not Essence20, in the Power Rangers RPG, they don't really equip different armors. Like, Power Rangers, from the time you morph the first time to the time you morph the last time, your suit very rarely changes at all. Sometimes you might get a battleizer added to it, or like a super-powered form added to it, but for the most part, that's kind of the thing about Power Rangers, is their suits are their suits, are their suits, are their suits, are their suits. And so what the training is basically when you're morphed, you get a bonus to your bonus to your toughness defense, and the armor training that you have indicates how big a bonus. Light gives you 1, medium gives you 2, heavy gives you 4. So the Red Ranger is going to have the highest toughness defense of most other Rangers for 2 different reasons. 1, again, they get that heavy armor training. 2, each role has increases in the 4 different essence scores at different places. And the number 1 essence score increase for the Red Ranger is strength. That's where they get their most increases, and it's the one where at level 1 they get a +2 increase to it. And your toughness defense is effectively 10 plus your strength score. So the Red Ranger is going to be a very, very tough strength-based character. Their second highest increase is going to be social, which that lends itself to the idea of them being the leader. Being able to inspire people and influence people with your words is a very, very common attribute in really effective leaders. Now notice I didn't say really good leaders. There are some really horrible, disgusting leaders that were incredibly effective at inspiring and influencing people to do the things that they want. Being a good leader does not mean that you are really, really good at influencing people. It's that you understand the situation well enough that you can use your ability to influence people to have the best possible outcome for everyone involved. That is the mark of a good leader. Simply being able to influence people makes you an effective leader, not a good one. So the third most increased thing is their speed, and then their 4th most increased is smarts. The Red Ranger is not really designed to be a huge egghead style character. And I'm trying to think if we've ever had a Red Ranger that was incredibly intelligent. And I don't think there is, simply because, again, the Blue Ranger tends to fill that role in the team of being the incredibly smart one. And so having 2 incredibly intelligent characters is difficult to write for. It's not impossible in any way, shape, or form, but it's difficult to write for. Kind of like, the relationship between Tony Stark and Bruce Banner in the Avengers movies, but also in comic books and stuff like that. Like, they're both incredibly intelligent people. Or the relationship between Tony Stark and Peter Parker, who's also a genius level intellect. You can have incredibly smart characters that have another incredibly smart character there, and not have them feel like they're always like filling the same role on a team. You just give them kind of different focuses for that intellect. But anyway, so yeah, but for the most part, that is the Spectrum role features for the Red Ranger. Moving on. At first level, you get 2 different things. First thing, every single Ranger gets this, is called its Morphin time. I'm not going to go into it in here. If you want a detailed explanation of its Morphin time, go to the Black Ranger roll. I have a timestamp for it. You can listen to my entire spiel about its Morphin time, but it's the same for every single Ranger, so I'm not going to talk about it. We've already talked about the big stuff. Your toughness increases, your jump distance increases. As a free action, you can call a power weapon, and when you're reduced to 0 health, you can avoid defeat by automatically returning to your natural form, unconscious, and at 1 health. Done. The second thing that you get is what we refer to as their table perk or their table feature. The reason I call it this is in every single role in the Essence20 system, there is a table that shows you all of the different stuff that you get at what level you get it at. And on every table in the Power Rangers RPG, there is a specific column that is linked to the table perk or the table feature. This is an exclusive ability for this Ranger, to the point where when they eventually introduced an ability to take a general perk that allows you to effectively take a role perk from another Spectrum class, they specifically say you are not allowed to take one that has something to do with a column on the table. So that's why I call it a table perk or a table feature. Power Strike is the table perk for the Red Ranger. And the basics of it, you can, when making any form of melee attack while morphed, spend a personal power to add a number of bonus damage to the attack. If successful, the amount is listed on the table above. So, the Power Strike table basically shows how much additional damage you do. At first level, it's only a single point of damage, but it gets all the way up to 4 points of damage by 20th level. And effectively, if we are thinking about this in D&D 5th edition terms, or just D&D terms in general, Power Strike is a smite. I mean, it works nearly identical to how smite works. You can, when making any form of melee attack while morphed, spend 1 personal power to add a number of bonus damage to the attack if successful. So this is what makes it slightly different than a Paladin Smite. For Power Strike, it says, when making any form of melee attack, you can spend 1 personal power to add a number of bonus damage to the attack if successful. So the way that a smite works in D&D 5th edition is it says when you hit with a melee attack, you can smite. That means that by definition, you have to see whether the attack hits or misses before you can add on the smite. For Power Strike, this is when you make any form of melee attack. You have to choose when you're making the attack, not after it hits. So because of that, the Power Strike is going to be slightly less effective than the Paladin Smite. And that was probably done on purpose, because one of the things that gets Paladins in trouble a little bit with certain people is Paladins are crit machines. And what I mean by that is when a Paladin has a critical strike, they will almost always, if they're being played well, add a smite to that, because smites, critical hits in 5th edition, double the number of dice that you roll. And smite gives you additional damage dice that you add to it. And it's a decent amount, too. It's either 4 or 5 D6 or D8. I can't remember which off the top of my head right now. Even with just base level smites. And you keep adding additional dice if you burn higher level spell slots. So a paladin that crits can add easily 12 additional dice to the damage roll. And so, yeah, with this, because again, the way that critical hits work in the Essence20 system is you basically can apply the damage effect twice. That would mean if they could choose to do this afterwards, they would effectively be quadrupling the damage a lot of the times and be very, very powerful. Because this does require it to happen as part of the attack roll instead of instead of after it hits, it means there's a chance that you can waste your power strike. However, doing certain things in the Essence to the 20 system can vastly increase your chance of hitting. Probably the simple of which is, again, your strength score is your highest score. And strength can be used for melee attacks by investing in the might skill. So investing in the might skill can mean that you're rolling the best dice you can when you're making this attack. In addition to that, you can also specialize in power weapon attacks or melee attacks that use might, things like that, and that will make it significantly more likely that you're going to be hitting. And then doing other things that can just give you upshifts and things like that. All of those are going to be very, very beneficial to Power Strike. And especially, again, if you are getting a critical hit, Power Strike is incredibly effective. Now, you have to use it before you see if you get a critical hit. But as I've mentioned before, with the Essence20 system, specialization means that you roll every die up to and including your skill die. And if any one of those rolls the maximum, other than the D2, if any one of those rolls the maximum, that means you're going to get a critical hit as long as the overall attack succeeds. So getting critical hits is not an extremely difficult thing in the Essence20 system if you plan things out correctly. And that's where your Power Strike is going to be the most effective. Again, we're eventually going to find out when they get extra attacks that they get more attacks than any other Kuga class. Effectively, they are the fighter of the Power Rangers role-playing game. And that also means that your Power Strike, because there's no limitation to how often you can Power Strike. It just has to be as part of an attack. Well, if you can get 4 attacks, that means you can Power Strike 4 times. And at maximum level, that means even without a critical hit, you're adding 8 additional damage. Now, it's taking you, at maximum level, it's not 8 additional damage, it's 16 additional damage, because it's 4 times 4. But that's costing you 4 power points on a character that's basically 2 days worth of power points. So that's going to be your biggest... That's going to be your biggest focus when you're playing a Red Ranger role is, how do I use my limited power points in the most effective manner? And if you have other Rangers on your team that have the ability to restore power points, giving you additional power points can vastly change the battle very, very quickly because of that Power Strike and it being able, especially if you get a critical hit on it, additional 16 damage turns into an additional 32 damage if all 4 of those were critical hits. So again, not quite as almost broken as the Pink Ranger's penetrating shot, but still very, very useful. And it does give the Red Ranger kind of a unique ability to be that leader. Again, you already have a higher toughness than most of the other characters. If you're exclusively spending your strength score increases into might and then conditioning, you can also have a lot of hit points as well, and you can turn this character into a pretty effective tank. And being able to go out and effectively just smite creatures out of existence will 100% paint a target on you without having to use your social abilities. But when we talk about the fact that, again, the Red Ranger's second highest ability score, or essence score, is social, that also means you can lean into the fact that your Power Strike is as powerful as it is to use that to fuel your distraction ability from one of the social skills that I can't remember right now. I think that's the persuasion skill or something like that. Anyway, it's one of the specializations you can take. And you can use that to, like, basically Power Strike an enemy down, or just Power Strike somebody and then go, hey, you're next. Shing! Why don't you try and stop me? That can be a very, very effective way to get enemies to attack you instead of the rest of your allies. So if you want to build this leader as, again, that kind of frontline general that takes a lot of hits for their troops, you definitely can, and you can use Power Strike to do that. Or if you want to turn them into, the kind of leader that just goes in and wipes out the enemy, you can do that too and focus significantly more on building up your might die and getting a specialization in it, so you're always doing everything that you can to try and get those critical hits. So, yeah, moving on. At level 2, you get 2 different abilities. The first one is Follow Me. And this is where my idea of calling them the leader comes from. Because this particular ability is such an interesting ability that doesn't just require like a mechanical, I'm a leader ability. This actually has... This basically requires the player to inspire trust from the other players, not so much for the player characters to trust the leader. The way that Follow Me works, at the beginning of any combat, instead of rolling their own initiative, your teammates may always choose to instead set their initiative as 1d4 lower than yours, minimum final result of 1. They must choose to follow this roll perk before you roll your initiative result, but each team member who chooses to do this emboldens you and adds a +1 to your results. So effectively the way this works, when everyone's rolling initiative, instead of rolling their own initiative, they can go, I'm going to follow him. And so you get a bonus to your initiative roll for how many people are following you. And then instead of rolling their initiative, they simply just roll a single d4 and they subtract that number from your roll. So if you roll an 18, everyone else would roll a d4 and subtract it. So you roll a 1, they'll go at 17. Or they roll a 1, they go to 17. They roll a 2, they go to 16, so on and so forth. This can be absolutely essential depending on the makeup of your team. What it means is one of the things that happens in the Essence20 system, if you try to roll a skill that you don't have any training in, you roll with a snag. Effectively, you roll 2d20s, you take the lower of the 2 scores. If you don't invest in initiative at least 1 point, you're going to be rolling your initiative at a snag, meaning you're probably going to be going last in the order, which in some instances can be useful. In a lot more instances is a huge detriment to your character and to the rest of your team. Because if something happens that takes you out of combat, you get stunned or something, you simply can't do anything and you never got a chance to do something that turn. So, Follow Me means nobody on your team has to actually invest in initiative. Because for the most part, unless they have really good rolls in general, they're very rarely going to roll better with a snag than they are rolling a d4 and just going 1 step lower than you. Now that also does mean if you want to use Follow Me often, you do need to invest in the initiative skill, which is a speed gauge skill, which we've already talked about, is your 3rd worst essence score. It's not your dead last, but it's not something that this ranger focuses on. So there's a good chance if Follow Me is going to be something that you want to use, and the rest of your team kind of builds their characters around it, where anyone that just really doesn't use speed, or even if they do use speed, they focus it on other aspects of speed, like getting their targeting skill as high as they can. Follow Me can basically take care of that, but it does mean that the Red Ranger needs to put at least a little bit of investment in the initiative as a skill. And if they put enough investment in the initiative skill, it effectively means that most of the time the entire Ranger team is going to be going before the enemy. Like if you build this Ranger as, I'm going to put all of my strength increases into might and conditioning to be a tank, and then all of my speed essences go directly into initiative, then you can have a character that acts first all the time, that their allies tend to act first as well, and can just take a crap ton of damage. Can be a very, very effective way of playing this. On the other hand, if you have other characters that are already planning on investing in their initiative skill because of other aspects of their character, then you might just not use Follow Me as much, or it may be that certain characters are always going to be rolling on their own, and then your character is going to be maybe just have one other character that always does Follow Me, or some characters will follow you sometimes and not do it other times. Like, there's a lot of different ways that you can use this. But this is a leadership ability. You really do need to understand how the rest of the team has built their characters to understand, do I need to invest in initiative? Or will it be fine if I just put 1 point in there so that I'm not rolling with a snag, and then I can just rely on the additional bonuses I get due to other rangers following me. Again, each one gives you a +1 bump to your roll, which is nice. So yeah, again, it's an interesting ability. And that's basically where I get the idea of the leader title for this character, is if you do focus a lot on Follow Me, again, the other players have to trust that you are going to roll well enough that it's not going to screw them over. Which means if I was playing the Red Ranger, no one would use Follow Me. Because theoretically, the Red Ranger could roll, like if you've got a D6 in your initiative, you could roll a 2 and a 2, have an initiative of 4, and then the rest of the Rangers go on 3, 2, and 1. And so the entire team goes behind. But there can still be benefits to that as well. If your team doesn't have anything interrupting the turn, as in wherever they show up at initiative, it's always your whole team and then the bad guys. That can be very, very useful, especially if you can chop the bad guys in half effectively, where you have some that go in front of you and some that go behind you. That can be a very, very useful thing to happen, at least on the first turn. Once you start going multiple turns, it really doesn't matter, because it just becomes all the bad guys go and then all of you guys go. So yeah, again, Follow Me, the most effective use of it is going to be understand your team, and understand if Follow Me is something that you're really going to want to invest in, or just not use it anywhere near as much, because there's other aspects of the Red Ranger that are useful, but Follow Me can make for a very, very powerful skill. So, moving on. The other second level ability is Weapon Mastery. Whenever you roll a 1 or 2 on a skill die for an attack you make with your power weapon, you can re-roll the die and must use the new roll, even if the new roll is a 1 or a 2. So, remember we talked about a different ranger. We specifically, they had the ability to re-roll 1s or 2s, but it didn't have that caveat of you must use the new roll. Well, this one specifically does. But again, when we're talking about fishing for criticals, this is a monumentally useful skill. It effectively means when you are rolling with specialization, your first roll, you don't technically have a 50% chance of rolling a crit, because your second roll can technically get a 1 or a 2, but it increases the chance from just a 25% chance up to, what is it? So it's 1, 2, so 4, into 6 out of 8. So whatever, 6 out of 8, 3, it turns into a 75% chance. Wow, that math was not difficult in any way, shape, or form. and I just made it difficult. But yeah, so weapon mastery, effectively, as long as you are rolling with specialization, you have a 75% chance of rolling a crit, because a minimum of a 75% chance, because as long as you're rolling that d4, the d4 has a 75% chance of rolling a crit, because on the first check, you cannot roll a 1 or a 2. So that just increases the chance of the second one, or just giving you an additional roll, just increases that. And then when you also think about on your d6, your d8, your d10, and your d12, anytime you roll a 1 or a 2, you get to re-roll that once. This makes fishing for crits significantly more, significantly easier, and it also means that your power strike is significantly more effective, because, again, anytime you use the power strike and you crit, you're going to be doing significantly more damage. That is your Paladin Smite. So weapon mastery is a fantastic way to fish for crits, especially once we start dealing with extra attack. When you're rolling 3 or 4 times a round for attacks, you are getting to the point where you're almost guaranteeing a critical hit on at least one of those attacks every single time. You just have to kind of figure out where you want to put your power strikes in to get the most benefit out of them. But even if they're not critting, the fact that you're able to reroll 1s and 2s, even if they're not getting to the maximum, means you're also significantly more likely to hit on your attacks, meaning your power strike is going to become less and less likely to miss, and thus waste the personal power point that you used to enact it. So weapon mastery, again, fits into that idea of the Red Ranger is that frontline, go wade into the combat ahead of your team style character that's going to be able to go in and, most importantly, is going to be hitting a lot of their attacks. So yeah, moving on. I'm done with my orange juice. The next group of abilities are all the same. And so I'm going to kind of lump them all together. Aside from the 5th level abilities, there's 2 different things you get at 5th level. They will have their own thing because they're a little bit different for the Red Ranger. But the rest of the stuff, every single Ranger gets. 3rd level, you get your Zords. Pick your Zords. You eventually also get Zord perks to kind of customize them. 4th level, you get your general perk. They work exactly like feats. And then 6th level, you get your grid powers. Again, for the Red Ranger, because not only are they a slow power regainer, they also have power strike that they're going to be using for a lot of their grid power for. So a lot of times when you're looking for grid powers, you're probably going to want to steer away from grid powers that require you to burn power points, because a lot of those power points are generally going to be better used for your power strike. However, Red Rangers are also the first Rangers, and normally almost exclusively the Rangers that get Battleizers. And Battleizers in general will take some personal power to activate. So you might... That might be one of the grid powers that you want to look at is maybe getting a Battleizer. Can never remember if Battleizers are general perks or grid powers. They feel like they should be grid powers, though. Anyway, so that's that stuff. Moving on. Now we move to water. At 5th level, you get 2 features. The first one, and this one is unique to the Red Ranger, I believe, is extra attack. Now, extra attack, not unique to the Red Ranger. However, the Red Ranger gets more attacks than any other character. At 5th level, they can attack twice. However, the number of attacks increases at 2 other points, where eventually you can get 3 attacks, and then eventually you can get 4 attacks. And it actually doesn't follow the same progression that extra attack follows in D&D 5th edition. You actually get them a little bit earlier than you would in 5th edition. Now, when do you get them? Well, this is something I do with every thing, is I will leave out certain key details, because my biggest fear for doing series like this is that someone will attempt to use my video to replace them actually purchasing the book. And I never want to do that. The Essence20 people and the folks over at Renegade have been nothing but nice to me. And I really, really love this system. So go buy the book. There's lots of different places you can pick it up. And they're great. So anyway. So yeah, with extra attack, this, because of how the character is built here, is a massive, massive deal for the Red Ranger. If you guys watch my D&D deep dive, where I do talk about the fighter, one of their defining features is they make attacks. They get more attacks than any other character in the game, and their action surge ensures that they're getting more attacks than any other character in the Giga game. That's effectively what extra attack does here. The Red Ranger gets more attacks than anyone else in the game. With their weapon mastery, they're going to be hitting more often than most other characters. And with Power Strike, they can ensure that those attacks are meaningful every single time. It's very, very useful, especially if you start modifying your power weapon to either, again, just like we talked about with a Pink Ranger, you can either build this to be, I'm going to give them the ability to just do additional damage or have more accurate attacks or things like that. Or you can just start adding additional damage types to the weapon, which gives you additional ways for the weapon to work. Probably the one that would be the most beneficial for the Red Ranger is the ability to do sonic damage with their weapon. Now, I don't know if there's a sonic upgrade in the Power Rangers core book. I'd have to look at the upgrades again, specifically for melee weapons. I know there is one for ranged weapons. But the reason I say sonic specifically, the sonic damage type allows you to target, I believe it's the willpower defense, instead of toughness or evasion. Which can mean if you have a really, really tough to hit monster, using sonic damage on it can bypass its highest defense scores to go for a significantly lower one. And again, the key to doing everything that this Ranger is good at is they have to hit. You know, Power Strike is wasted power points if you miss. So it does require you to take a single downshift in order to do that with sonic damage. But going from like a D10 to a D8, the average roll of a D8 is a 5. The average roll of a D10 is a 6. You are reducing 1 in your average roll to possibly reduce their defense by 5, 6, 7, 8. Depending on how the monster was built, their willpower defense might be significantly lower. It also does mean that you need to understand the enemies, and possibly having an ally ranger that has the ability to find out what these defenses are can be essential. So again, knowledge is very powerful, and this character's not built to be super knowledgeable. So another aspect of that leadership ability is know your team and know what your team can know. It could be very simple for your Red Ranger as they're fighting. If they keep having trouble, telling your Blue Ranger, hey, figure out what this dude's weakness is. And having them through a series of checks. I can't remember if they actually have an ability in the game that effectively works. Like the Battlemaster Fighter has a ability that allows them to basically find out things like armor class. I don't know if they have something like that in the Power Rangers RPG because I'm drawing a blank. If they do have that ability, put it in the comments down below. But through a lot of different things, using your science skills and various, you should be able to figure out at least what is their weakest score if your DM won't tell you exact numbers. That would make perfect sense. And so that working together with one of the Rangers can make your extra attack even more powerful. Again, depending on how you kind of upgrade your power weapon. And again, because weapon mastery is built around power weapon attacks, you do want to make sure that your power weapon is the weapon that you are using almost all the time. And that means that your speed skill, your speed essence score needs to be at least 3. Why? Because In the Essence20 system, the number of actions that you get is based on your speed score. If you have a speed score of 1, then you can, on your turn, you can either take a move action or a standard action, not both. If you have a speed score of 2, you can take a move action and a standard action. Speed score of 3, move action, standard action, and a free action. And each additional point in speed after that gives you additional free actions. Well, to summon your power weapon, you have to use a free action. So, in order for the ranger on their first turn to be able to summon their power weapon and attack with it, they need to have that free action right there. So they don't have to burn a standard action turning it into a free action, which I can't even remember if you can do that in this game. I know you can't do that in D&D 5th edition, but I can't remember if you can do that in this game. So anyway, yeah, you need at least one free action to get the most benefit out of this ranger. So, yeah. Other than that, moving on. Also at 5th level, you get Let's Bring Them Together. Yeah. This is probably the most pointless ability of any of the rangers. And I'm going to explain to you why. Let's Bring Them Together is exactly what it sounds like. This is creating the Power Blaster. And I'm going to read you the text because it's a weird thing. You may, as a standard action, spend 1 personal power to begin the Let's Bring Them Together process, taking a contingency action with the trigger of, quote, when all of my teammates' power weapons are joined, we will combine our attack on, end quote, naming the target of the attack. For this feature to function, each other team member must move to be adjacent to you and name the same contingency action trigger. When all of your teammates have moved to be adjacent, spent the 1 personal power and named the appropriate contingency action trigger, your team collectively triggers the contingency actions and the combined power weapon attack takes place. The ranged attack has a reach of 100 to 50, gains an additional upshift 2 to hit using your attack traits and abilities, but inflicts 1 damage upon a successful hit per participating member. After the attack takes place, the team's power weapons are returned to them as normal. So, this is a bad action for a number of reasons. 1, it costs a personal power, and we already know that the Red Ranger can use personal power to add at least 1 additional bit of damage. And at this point, they already have 2 attacks, so this is... Normally, if they only hit with 1 attack and spend only 1 personal power, they can do 2 damage to an enemy. This one relegates them to only doing 1 damage to the enemy. And it requires the entire team to come together and do this action. And there's and not only that, they all have to be within 5 feet of you. So there's a lot of different ways that Let's Bring Them Together could be stopped. Knock out a ranger, Let's Bring Them Together doesn't work. Tie up a ranger so they can't get to you, Let's Bring Them Together doesn't work. Rangers don't make their attack correctly, Let's Bring Them Together doesn't work. Now you do get an upshift to the attack, which is nice. It doesn't specifically tell you what skill to use to attack. It just says using your attack traits and abilities. So theoretically, it sounds like whatever you would normally use to attack with your power weapon, like for the Red Ranger, they would use Might, despite the fact that you can't use Might to make a ranged attack. In this particular instance, you can. So yes, you do get the upshift, which is useful. If you have specialization, that means you're that much more likely to get crits and things like that. All those things are great, but you're limiting to yourself to a single attack that requires everybody else on the team to also do this. And at most, if you have a 5-person team, at most, you can do 5 damage. The Red Ranger on their own can do, I'm going to see, at 5th level, At 5th level, they can. At 6th level, on their own, they can do more than they can do 5 damage and spend a personal power just on their own, just by using their extra attack and power strike, and that's without a critical hit. So let's bring them together. Messes with the action economy because all of the Rangers have to use their action to do this. You can only attack a single target, and you're actually doing less damage by using this. The only advantage to this is it's a ranged attack, and you get an upshift too, which there's so many other ways to get upshifts that none of that is really beneficial. Now, the other thing that's interesting about this is it would sound like, because this is the only Ranger that gets this ability to basically create the power weapon. So it would seem like if you want to use the Power Blaster or whatever you want to call your combined weapon, you have to have a Red Ranger on your team, and they have to be the one to start this. That is the only way that this works. That also means that Follow Me becomes really important because, again, if everybody follows you, that means you can use Let's Bring Them Together and not have to worry about any interruptions because all the Rangers are in one static block. So yeah, it would seem if you want to use a Power Blaster, this is the way that you have to do it. That being said, there are already rules in the Essence20 Mighty Morphin Power Rangers system that allow you to make combined weapon attacks. If you go to Chapter 8 Equipment, there is a subheading called Combined Weapons. And this is how it works. As a team, all Rangers may spend their full action to move to the same area. Full action is effectively the same as a full action from 3rd edition where you use your move and your action is one thing. So here, as a team, all Rangers may spend their full action to move to the same area within 5 feet of at least 2 other Rangers and combine their weapons into one supercharged weapon. There are restrictions for these combined weapons, however, and then they talk about the Power Blaster and the Astro Blaster Booster Mode, which are 2 different versions of combined weapons. But the combined weapon rules here, first of all, don't require you to spend a personal power. You have to use your move and your action, which you're technically already doing with the Red Ranger's ability. And then we specifically talk about the Power Blaster. The Power Blaster does damage equal to the amount of power weapons it is made of, but only hits if over half the team succeeds on their skill tests. So the way that Let's Bring Them Together is written for the Red Ranger sounds that each Ranger makes their individual attack with the Power Blaster, and then for each one that hits, it does 1 damage. For the Power Blaster, as long as at least over half the team succeeds. So if you have a 5 Ranger team, you need 3 people to succeed. If you have a 6 Ranger team, you need 4 people to succeed, because that's be more than half, and 3 is half. But that means 2 of your Rangers can fail, and you still do the same amount of damage using the combined weapon rules that you would do if you use the Let's Bring Them Together. The big difference being you don't have to spend a personal power to do it. So as you can see, Let's Bring Them Together is basically a lesser version of the combined weapon rules that already exist. And there's no real benefit for using your limited resource to do this, which isn't how it's portrayed on TV. Whenever they used the Power Blaster on TV, it was a finishing move. I think there might have been 1 or 2 monsters where they hit them with the Power Blaster and it didn't kill them for whatever reason. But it was extremely rare. Anytime they used the Power Blaster, or Mighty Morphin actually had this thing where they take their blade blasters, and the Yellow and Pink Ranger would stand on the Red, Blue, and Black Ranger's shoulders, and they would point all of their blade blasters into the center, and they'd make this kind of star shape that shot off. Those were 2 kind of combination attacks that were iconic, and they were always used as finishing moves. 5 damage is not a finishing move. Again, even at level 5, there are characters that can do 5 points of damage. And again, I've already mentioned, once you hit level 6, you can definitely do 5 points of damage with the Red Ranger. So yeah, it's not that powerful. For me, if I wanted this to be something for the Red Ranger to make them have a specialized version of the combined weapon, I would say the Red Ranger burns the energy instead of all Rangers. Because again, this is 5 personal power that turns into 5 points of damage, possibly. And if you miss your hit, you've just wasted your personal power. I would say either just have the Red Ranger burn the power, or make it a contingency thing that the Rangers have to burn a collective amount of power equal to half the number of weapons in there rounded up. So if you have 5 Rangers, you'd have to spend 3 personal power to get this thing to get together. However, that additional personal power translates to you do 2 damage per weapon that's built in there. So now, instead of just doing 5 damage with a 5-person team, you do 10 damage, which feels like a finishing blow. Give it additional damage, give it something else, and reduce the amount of personal power that it does. And this could be a very interesting thing. I don't like the fact that this one, it does give you an upshift, which is nice, but it still requires each character to hit their attack. And if they can't hit their attack for whatever reason, that means you're going to be losing out on that damage while still spending personal power for this. So since there's already a combined weapons rule, I think Let's Bring Them Together should be a specialized version of that just gets better. I think the best way to do this is have it do just a single personal power that the Red Ranger burns, because this is a Red Ranger ability, or somebody in the team can do, or maybe it's the fact that however many personal power they spend, that's how much additional damage it does. So 1 personal power does 1 additional damage. 2 personal power does 2 additional damage. You just put a cap at how much power you can do at certain levels. That would be very simple, very easy, and then follow the combined weapon rules that already exist. Everybody has to come together. Everybody makes their skill test, and if more than half make it, then you do all the damage. That's how I think Let's Bring Them Together could be a really, really useful ability. And it feels really good, and it feels like part of that leadership ability. And that leader thing where, while yes, anyone can call to build the Power Blaster, when the Red Ranger does it, good things happen. That would make this really good. The way it's written right now, it's a waste of a skill. I would never, there's not a situation where Let's Bring Them Together is going to be beneficial for your team, because your team has so many other things that are useful to them. And if you don't have a 5-person team, if you're a 4 or 3 Ranger team, Let's Bring Them Together gets significantly less useful, because it's still costing you personal power. And at that point, with a 4-person team, just with your extra attack, you can already do as much damage without having to get everyone else to come in and use their movement and everything to get in there. So yeah, overall, Let's Bring Them Together, not a good thing. But if you modify it in the way I talked about here, it can be very, very cool, and it can fit into that leader type role that this character is supposed to emulate. So yeah, moving on. The next ability, since we're skipping grip powder, at level 7, you get resilience. While morphed, when targeted by any attack you were aware of, you may choose to spend a personal power and roll your athletics skill die. Reduce all incoming attacks by the amount rolled until the start of your next turn. This is a really big deal. And again, this is another thing where, depending on how you want to build your character, if you want to be that really tough, strong Red Ranger, putting everything into might is kind of a necessity. However, if you want to be that more defensive Ranger, putting things into condition and now putting things into athletics means that you start taking significantly less damage. remember the wording here. You reduce all incoming attacks by the amount rolled until the start of your next turn. And this is when targeted by any attack you're aware of. So you burn a personal power, roll your athletic skill die. The higher that die, the more damage you're going to reduce. And it's all incoming attacks by the amount rolled until the start of your next turn. Because of how that is phrased, it said all incoming, not each incoming. So it's not like each attack that comes against you, you reduce it by 12. That would make this massively broken. But it does mean you effectively get kind of a temporary shield of whatever your athletic skill die is. And that can be massive. Especially, again, if you've already been encouraging enemies to attack you, activating resilience can mean that they're effectively wasting their turns having to kind of wear down this armor that you have that's just preventing damage from hitting you. And for a single personal power, the amount of damage negation that you have and the amount of mitigation that you get from this is really, really good. Compared to other things, like if we're talking about just total hit point of one side versus total hit points of the other, the amount of hit points that you remove from, the amount of negative hit points that you remove from your side of the table is really powerful when you consider things like, what was it? Was it the Blue Ranger that could just do a 1-for-1, I will burn one personal power to give you one hit point? This is one personal power for, if you have a D12, that is up to 12 points of damage that just disappear from your team. Now, it's only damage that affects you, so it does require you to put yourself in a position where you're going to be hit. But that's not the most difficult thing in the world. Again, there's a specific specialization under the social essence. I believe it's the persuasion social essence score. I'm actually going to look it up here because I've talked about it so many times. Yeah, the deception. That's what it is. The deception. One of the sample specializations for deception is called distraction. Skill at keeping others' attention on you rather than the world around them through misdirection. So distraction, I could very easily see someone using that to go, hey, can I make them focus on me instead of my allies? So combining distraction with resilience, this is a really, really useful skill. But again, you have to build around it. Does that mean if you only have like a D2 or a D4 in athletics that this is a useless skill? No. Any additional damage you can stop from taking is always going to be useful. And even a D2 means that, you know, spending a personal power to get 2 points of damage gone away is still a good trade. It's not a fantastic trade. And it's going to be a significantly better trade the better your athletic skill die is. But it's still a good trade in certain situations, especially since one damage point can be the difference between staying morphed and becoming unmorphed or becoming defeated entirely. Like that's a big deal. So the ability to just choose on your own that you're going to go, no, I'm not going to fall down this turn can be very, very useful. So yeah. Overall, very interesting, very unique ability. Moving on. At 9th level, you get Team Focus. You add an upshift to any melee attack that targets a target that has already been attacked by your teammate since your last turn. And then at a higher level, the upshift increases. So Team Focus is kind of a weird thing because it technically kind of goes against Follow Me, at least on the first level. Because Team Focus, technically the most beneficial version of Team Focus is one ranger attacks and then you can attack. And again, with upshifts are really, really good for crit fishing and just for ensuring that you're going to be able to hit when you are specialized. If you are specialized, upshifts are an unbelievable blessing, especially once you start upshifting into things like 2d8 or 3d6, where you're rolling all of the main dice and then you're also rolling these additional 2d8 or these additional 3d6 and just getting tons and tons and tons of dice. Only one of them has to roll the maximum number to get your critical hit. And all of them can roll high enough to ensure that you hit. So Team Focus can be very, very useful when you combine it with Power Strike. But it does mean if you're using Follow Me, you're probably not going to be able to use Team Focus on your first turn. It also means if you're fighting a bunch of putties, a lot of time putties are going to be one-hit kills. So Team Focus is really only useful when you're fighting stronger enemies. Lieutenants, monsters of the week, and like major villains, Team Focus is going to be essential. But it also does mean for things like the Pink Ranger's volley, it says specifically to any melee attack that targets a target that has already been attacked by your teammate. Doesn't say that it needs to be damaged or hit, just needs to be attacked. So something like Volley allows you to attack multiple targets. With the Pink Ranger understanding that you have Team Focus, if they make sure one of their volley shots always hits the enemy that they know the Red Ranger is going to want to be going off against, they're going to help with that Team Focus. Any Ranger that has an area attack, being able to do that, or Rangers that get multiple attacks, using one attack to bop this creature so that the Red Ranger can get their Team Focus while they're doing other stuff can be incredibly important. It also means you only need one other teammate to do this, so the rest of the team also needs to be aware of who's attacked that monster. If nobody's attacked it, it's a good idea for someone to do something to give the Red Ranger the ability to do all their cool stuff. But if one person's already attacked, everyone else can go back to doing their same thing. So Team Focus does encourage the rest of the party to be thinking about what the other players are doing, which is a very, very good thing. And to get the most benefit out of it, again, the Red Ranger needs to be aware of what's happening with the team. So, another leadership skill. Moving on. And the Red Ranger doesn't get any other abilities until their pinnacle ability. At 20th level, you get Red Ranger Prime. Every Ranger gets a Prime ability, and they generally do three things. One, they will increase defenses. The Red Ranger Prime actually has something really interesting. Instead of increasing your toughness, which is what I think every other thing has done, is just increase the toughness. Red Ranger Prime increases... or actually adds resistance to normal, blunt, and sharp damage. So, blunt and sharp are the only two physical damage types in Essence20. They don't have a piercing type damage. So, basically, Red Ranger Prime is resistant to all physical attacks, which means they do... I believe resistance works the same way in this as it does in other RPG, or in D&D 5th edition. Which is just, it takes half damage. So, again, that's a really, really big deal. Combine Power Strike and some Distraction, and that means enemies are wasting their turns damaging you with physical attacks. Now, energy-based attacks, it's not going to do anything, but when you're dealing with putties and stuff like that, or you're dealing with a monster of the week that uses a sword or some other weapon like that, in general, they're going to be doing blunt or sharp damage, and the Red Ranger is going to be perfectly keyed to going one-on-one with them and not having an issue with it. They can take attacks for their allies, other stuff like that, because they're going to just take less damage than the rest of their allies. In addition to that, they get an additional point of damage on power weapon attacks. So again, combining Power Strike with Weapon Mastery with extra attack, they can do lots of damage. Not quite to the level of the Pink Ranger, but still a lot of damage. But this is the kicker. The Red Ranger Prime gains an edge on strength skill checks. And Might is a strength skill. So, what an edge is its advantage from D&D 5th edition. You roll your D20 twice, take the higher of the two rolls. So once you get to Red Ranger Prime, if you've invested and specialized in your might skill, you're basically not going to be missing your attacks. You're getting 4 attacks per turn, and you can put a power strike on all 4 of those if you've got the power points for it, and do a pretty immense amount of damage, especially with specialization and upshifts from things like Team Focus. You can become a really, really good damage dealer doing this. And again, taking out enemies and doing large points of damage is generally a good way to convince enemies that they need to take you out. So all of these things work together to create a very, very interesting, powerful character. So moving on to final thoughts. So the Red Ranger in and of themselves, again, I call them the leader, and that's mostly based on the follow me ability. But as we start looking at other things, things like resilience and team focus can also be used in a very leader type ability, can also be used as very kind of leadership style abilities, where they both, if you understand your team and you use your abilities and skills correctly, can be used to be a very effective leader. However, they can also be used to be a very, very selfish damage dealing style character, which is why at first, and especially once we started dealing with extra attack, which is why at first I started feeling like leader might not be the best name for it. But I still kind of stand by that decision going through the entire thing here. The one problem with this class is let's bring them together. As it is written, it is a completely worthless ability. There is never a situation where let's bring them together is going to be the best use of your time ever. It just doesn't help. My suggestion, and I think the one that I like the most, is the team collectively has to decide to spend a number of power points. Anyone that's part of Let's Bring Them Together can spend those points. And the number of points you spend dictate the amount of damage it does. It'll be number of power points spent multiplied by the number of players in there, number of characters involved. So if you spend 1 power point, there's 5 people, it'll do 5 damage. 2 would be 10, 3 would be 15, 4 would be 20. And I think you just put a cap on how many power points you can spend at any given level. And you can just cap that at the same amount as Power Strike. Because you already know it goes from 1 to 4 as you level up. If you want specifics of that, buy it. And so just tie it to, you can spend a number of power points equal to the bonus that Power Strike gives you. And then just use the normal rules for combination attacks. I think that works significantly better than Let's Bring Them Together. It feels like a much more powerful ability, and it actually feels like a finisher instead of just a waste of power points and things like that. And by allowing anyone that's part of it to be able to burn their personal power to do it, you're incentivizing the team to understand who has the most personal power to be able to use for this. It might be the Red Ranger because everybody else has other uses for their personal power that are very, very useful. Or it could be the Blue Ranger because they have so many personal power from just having fast regeneration. Or it might be the Black Ranger because they just simply don't have other uses for their personal power that they are using very often. Could be anybody doing this. And again, that would lean into that leadership role because technically combination attacks already exist. But if the Red Ranger initiates the combination attack, then something special happens. And that makes the Red Ranger feel like a leader and gives you an actual benefit to using Let's Bring Them Together. Otherwise, it's a pointless ability and you can basically just throw it away, because there is never a situation where that is going to be the best thing that your entire team can do. So other than that, I think it's a cool character, and that one change, I think, turns it into an amazing character that really does feel like the leader of a Power Ranger team. That being said, that is going to be all for us today. As always, again, remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon to turn notifications on. All those things are super, super important in the comments down below. Obviously, I gotta know who's your favorite Red Ranger. You have so many to pick from. Again, every single Power Rangers team has had a Red Ranger, and there have been tons that have been really cool. As far as me for personal favorite Red Rangers, I generally don't navigate or I generally don't tend to be really like attracted to the Red Ranger role. Like, it's generally other Rangers that I find more interesting. But as far as like my personal favorite Red Ranger, I mean, obviously I like Tommy, and I think he made a pretty decent Red Ranger. I think Wes probably is my favorite Red Ranger from Time Force, because Wes is a really interesting character. Despite the fact that he's not the leader of the Power Rangers, he eventually does, through learning from Jen, he eventually learns how to be a leader and comes into his Red Ranger powers really, really well. And I think the kind of subplots he has with Jen, the subplots that he has with the Quantum Ranger, that I can never remember his damn name, and the subplot that he has with his father, I think all of those are really, really interesting. But again, I'm interested to hear, what are your favorite Red Rangers, and what do you guys think of Let's Bring Them Together? Do you guys think I'm too harsh on it? Do you like my change to it? Do you think it works perfectly fine the way it is? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that is all for me today. I will see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.